Today we're diving into the Salem Witch Trials, the OG courtroom drama, the Real Housewives of 1692, but with longer headlines and larger consequences. I felt like that was in really poor taste. I'm so sorry, it won't happen again. It will happen again, but I'm sorry. But I'm apologetic about it, and that's what matters at the end of the day. Today, I'm headed to Salem, Massachusetts to explore the town where more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft, which doesn't sound like a lot, but to put it into perspective, that's 4% of the town's population. How it all began. Our story kicks off in 1692 with 9-year-old Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, two girls in a random Salem village who were probably bored out of their mind. One day they decide to spice things up by having a fit of screaming, throwing, and contorting themselves. Instead of sending them to drama class for their beautiful skill, the local doctor, who by the way couldn't even write, diagnosed them with witchcraft. That's right, the village doctor, William Griggs, claimed that their symptoms could not be explained by any sort of medical diagnosis, but it simply had to be witchcraft and black magic afflictions. I just feel like they had that kind of like warm tone talking back then, you know what I'm saying? Soon, other girls in the community like Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott get in on all the fun that we're having, claiming that they are being tormented by invisible witches. But it doesn't end there. Of course, the men get involved. Local judges Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne get the girls to accuse a few local women of afflicting them with these horrors. Enter Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados who worked for the Paris family. Betty Paris, the 9-year-old girl who started it all. When the girls start pointing the finger at her, she really said like, okay, fuck it, I'm out of here. Instead of denying it, she leans in with the wildest story ever. Like, I swear this is where we came up with Halloween. She talked about seeing the devil, signing his guest book, dancing naked in the woods with many other people, and witches riding on broomsticks. As the story goes, her confession was the spark that started the whole mess. Some historians like Elaine Breslaw think that Tituba was legitimately a practicing witch. She picked up some sort of like voodoo or like witch doctor stuff in the Caribbean, but we know now that Samuel Parrish beat the shit out of her for weeks until she finally came up with a confession, so what's crazy is that her confession actually spares her life. She ends up being carted off to prison, but then they use her as like a resource throughout the trials, and she ends up surviving this entire reign of terror. After Tituba's confession, it's basically like, oh my gosh, my bread went stale. Must be witches. And let me just say, it would be nice to have a scapegoat like that. Oh my. Next up was Sarah Good, or Sarah Not So Good. Sarah Good was a local beggar woman who, according to historical records, was a bit of a diva. She had an attitude problem, which of course for 1692 Puritan standards probably meant that she just like spoke her mind. She wasn't the perfect mold. When the authorities accused her, she famously said, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard. If you take my life away, God will give you blood to drink." She really went there. Unfortunately, the Puritans didn't like her too, and they threw her into prison. But they didn't stop there, because they also sentenced her 4-year-old daughter to prison. I don't know what this 4-year-old was doing that they felt she warranted any amount of suspicion. My guess is that there just wasn't anybody in the community who wanted to pitch in and take care of the child, so they just were like, ugh. Also, while you're in prison, mind your baby, please. Sarah was hanged on July 12th, 1692, and the 4-year-old daughter Dorcas survives after 8 months in jail, but it's recorded that she had lifelong complications due to that stint. Yeah, developmentally, that cannot be good. That's how like mommy bloggers were talking about COVID would mentally affect their children. That's probably the same thing. They got that Dorcas 1692 effect. No, your kid just had to socially distance at school. Be real. That's parents of seniors in 2020. How do I know? The drama there was, can't even repeat it. Next is Sarah Osborne. Sarah Osborne was not exactly like Salem's elites. She didn't really fit in. She hadn't shown up to church in over 3 years. That makes 2 of us, babe. And as you might guess, this was a huge no-no in Puritan culture. Oh, and did I mention she was in a messy land dispute with the Putnam family? So we can kind of connect the dots and assume that the Putnam family might have seen an easy in here. Obviously, Osborne's crime was not witchcraft. It was being different than her neighbors, not fitting the Puritan ideal, and having a little bit of beef with her neighbors. Damn, guys, tag yourself in the comments. I found myself here. Very Sarah Osborne coded. Unfortunately, she passes away in prison due to the filthy conditions, and she is one of the first casualties of the Salem Witch Trials.
Wait. Before we go, I think we need some fuel.
Yes, we do.
So today we're gonna be making witch's brew with my favorite beverage in the world, Red Bull. So this recipe is a classic. So crack that open. And look how cute, we got these little like eyeball cups. First ingredient is sketchy hotel ice. Oh, that's like 80% water. Well, so this would be better if you had fresher ice. We're gonna do a little bit of Red Bull. We're using sugar-free because they knew. We didn't even have to tell you that we're using sugar-free. They taste the same, honestly.
They do.
I should know. I have one every single day of my life, and sometimes if I'm tired, I have two. First, you're gonna do a little bit of lemon flavored whatever you want. And you're going for sort of a yellow color.
It's your yellow dye diet.
This is your yellow dye. Mix that in there. Next, we're gonna do blue raspberry or whatever blue flavor you like. But I think the lemon blue raspberry combo is really delicious. Ooh, so you're gonna get this kind of like spooky witch potion. This is really good. It's like lemon blue raspberry with the flavor of Red Bull that I honestly couldn't describe the flavor of Red Bull besides just like good. I should make this really cool potion flavor to hex your enemies and create a love spell.
We've created a love spell. Everybody's gonna love us now.
So I am #1 Red Bull stan.
Your #1 Red Bull stan?
Do you know what stan means? Stan is like a level higher than a fan.
Oh.
Go check out Red Bull at your nearest grocer or convenience store. They have so many new flavors. Every single time I check, I swear they're adding something new and sugar-free and original, which you know we appreciate. Let Red Bull give you your wings.
But let's pause for a moment and talk about real witchcraft, because one issue is that these women weren't even fucking witches. They were just girls minding their business. The witch trials may have been fueled by fear-mongering and hysteria, but real witchcraft actually has its own really cool history that I want to cover. Today, over 1 million Americans identify as Wiccans or witches. In modern times, witchcraft is practiced by a community that believes in spiritualism, self-improvement, healing, naturism, spirituality, personal growth and improvement, and nature. I'll be meeting with a real-life witch in Salem who's agreed to show me the ropes about what being a modern witch looks like. Spoiler alert, there's no dancing naked in the forest or signing a pact with the devil, so if you were here for that, you can click off.
Well, hi.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in, guys. So we want a reading today?
I think we're ready.
Cool.
I've had a reading done once at a farmer's market.
Okay.
It was really fun.
Good.
You're a newcomer, right?
Yeah, never had a reading.
Nice. So if it's okay, we'll start with you. I'm just feeling like we need to go to you first. Is there anything that you want me to focus the cards on today, or did you just want to see what kind of comes up?
Yeah, just see what kind of comes up.
Cool.
There's definitely an energy in here. Is anybody else feeling it, or is it just me? 'Cause, like,
We do a lot of rituals in here.
How do you feel about witch representation in media?
I think we're doing better. I think that we have had a lot of new shows coming out and movies that have come out that have a little bit more accurate in depicting witches, but certainly there's still a stigma that exists, and a lot of it comes from Hollywood and it comes from witches and how they're depicted in movies. I think that in modern witchcraft, people are understanding that that is a fantasy version of what witchcraft looks like, but every now and then I get a client or somebody who comes in and I have to let them know that unfortunately we're not going to be able to turn your ex-boyfriend into a toad or whatever it is and have a long kind of educational conversation about witchcraft. Yeah, I think we're doing much better. Even though I make predictions, they're more like possibilities, okay? So anything that I say is not necessarily going to happen. You have to have that intention to either make it happen or work against it in some sort of way. So this is the most likely things that you're gonna kind of be seeing. And we'll just do like the next 6 months.
the knocking.
I'm just removing energy off the cards. So
Like the last person.
and from our conversation,
Oh, okay.
because because like we're
talking. Be talking about things maybe.
No, I mean it's fine. You'll just see me knocking because when I take a minute to kind of zone in on your energy and what's coming up for you, I just like to let the cards know that now it's time to pick up stuff.
This is what I do when I cheat playing Uno.
So should we not ask questions when you get into the zone, or is it okay to keep?
It's okay. Everybody does their work differently. I'm very casual with how I do things. We just kind of want to know about the next 6 months-ish for you. Or,
sure.
Yeah, let's see what comes up. All right. Okay, so definitely some money stories coming up here, okay? Some are good, some are not so good. So we'll talk about that. So here we have the Six of Wands. This is generally a really celebratory card telling you that you're coming out of a time where, things have been good. Maybe there's been a lot going on, family celebrations, people kind of looking forward to seeing you. Celebratory card that talks about kind of coming out of a time where maybe things were a little bit more uncomfortable or a little bit, challenging for you. So this card does talk about really being embraced by your community and your family. Now, we do have a lot of 6 energy because now we've got the 6 of Pentacles coming up, letting you know that sometimes you're giving way more than you're receiving in your relationships. And this could be the case at work too, because Pentacles cards sometimes talk about our money and they sometimes have stories to tell us about our career. We have this kind of mirrored here with our next card, which is the 5 of Pentacles. The 5 of Pentacles talks about desire for more. It talks a little bit about kind of hopes and fears and desperation. It's one of the few cards in the deck where we have a winter scene depicted and a lot of black. There's other cards where there's black, but that always really drives me when I see like a color pattern that's going on. And in this case, I think the future, what it's talking about is potentially wanting to save or wanting to kind of bring in more income streams to support potentially some people in the family. So that's kind of what I'm seeing coming up is more support for those people in the family. And then here we've got the 2 of Swords letting me know that in the next 6 months, you'll be making some big decisions. And I think some of this is to alleviate some of the stress and conflict that could be coming up from some of these money stories that I had mentioned before.
Interesting.
Is this making sense for what you're going through right now or for what things are coming up?
I can think of so many things like, this for that, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's this or that. So I don't know. So I can tell you, I just came back from Moab last weekend on a trip with all my friends. And it was like, the energy in this room makes me a little like teary, or maybe it's the energy drink I just chugged.
No, I feel it too, but I also had 200 milligrams of caffeine and a Dunkin' Donuts before that, so I feel it too.
But it's really fun to be surrounded by so many like amazing people, especially to go into this age where your kids are grown and you have time and to have a support group.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking here.
Sounds good. So we're going to pull one more card and see what outcome will be.
Should we be scared of witches?
No. Well, this is the thing. I bet most people actually do know someone who is a witch or identifies as a witch, but maybe isn't super out about calling themselves that. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say wishy-washy, but kind of like more gentle terms that you might hear people using. People might say, oh, I'm spiritual, or I'm a light worker, or like these kinds of things. And people can identify as that. They don't have to take on the word witch. I definitely think we shouldn't be scared of witches. There's people out there, a couple people that are maybe up to no good, but the vast majority of witches are super friendly, usually very intelligent. They're doing their research and they're studying and their personal work.
Do you know where the practice even began?
I think every culture has historical links to some sort of spiritual practice that we now could kind of make connections to witchcraft with. If we go back to like the 18th century, the 19th century, we're seeing a lot of interest in spiritualism, especially the Victorian age, people playing parlor games. We get the Ouija board and those kinds of things.
Oh my God, and what are your thoughts on parlor games?
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, like Ouija specifically now has a very negative connotation
I'm so
to
scared
it.
of it. I don't know if I could ever crack one out.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend it. And the reason is because it's so often been used for games and for fun and for, so it's not been taken seriously as a method of connecting with spirit. It totally could be though.
Have you had some groundbreaking experiences using one?
Using a Ouija board? I've only used one when I was a kid. There are kind of versions of Ouija boards that you'll see in the magical community, and they usually call them talking boards or spirit boards. But now I do a lot of work with channeling energy from spirits.
Okay.
So doing a lot of like automatic writing or getting messages and in meditation and that sort of thing.
Thank Thank you so much for having us, Nicole. That was really so amazing. Where can everybody find you?
So Instagram is the best place to get a hold of me. I am at Highest Good Readings on Instagram, and then Modern Magic in Salem is at Modern Magic Salem.
And we're back. With the confessions of Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne, Salem has gone into a full-on frenzy. More than 200 people were accused. This included grandmas, grandpas, kids, beggars, ministers, and even animals. Like somebody's literal dog was accused of witchcraft. And accusations could be based on anything. Someone looked at you funny. Well, that's a witch. Did your crops fail? Well, that was obviously a witch and not your dumb husband who forgot how to water them. Did somebody forget to turn off the lights so now the electric bill's a little bit higher? I always say this, it's always a witch. It's definitely a witch and definitely not me, okay? I thought this quote by Arthur Miller in The Crucible was very good. The witch hunt was a perverse manifestation of the panic, which set in among all classes when the balance began to turn toward greater individual freedom. And that's what America's about, baby, USA. Now let's talk about how they actually trialed the witches. When someone was accused of witchcraft, the trials that followed were a mix of superstition, creativity, and downright cruelty. Here's a breakdown of some of the fuck shit that these Puritans were up to. The swimming test, also called trial by water. The theory is that water is pure, witches are dirty, so if a witch goes in the water will eject them and they'll float. So how do we test this? Obviously, we bind them to a chair, throw the chair in the water, and then if you're a witch, you float it up out of the water, you're taken out, and they would hang you or they would burn you at the stake. And if you were innocent, lucky you drown to the bottom and then you just died. So comment below if you'd rather be hanged, burned, or drowned to death. Next was the touch test, and this one is such an inside job. This shit would suck. Basically, all the little girls would hang out in the courtroom, right? And whoever was accused of witchcraft would come up to the stand. The girls would start sobbing, and then the witch would go touch the afflicted girls. And if the girls stopped crying, it was because they were under the witch's spell, and that person was obviously a confirmed witch. But if the girls kept crying and weren't affected, that meant that they weren't under the spell. Therefore, this person is not a witch. So very much your fate is in the hands of a few 9 to 13-year-old women. Number 3 is classic. I feel like this is what you guys think I be cooking up in my kitchen when I make baking videos, but this is called a witch cake. And it's basically they take rye meal and then they have the afflicted girls piss on it, mix it together, bake it into a cake. And then this is actually sad. This is actually not super funny because it's really weird. And then they feed it to a dog. And if the dog starts acting weird, it's because there's magic afoot. And if the dog really likes the piss cake, it's because the girls are fine. This is just really weird. I don't know who came up with this. What? I don't understand. I literally am so confused by this. I don't even want to talk about it. Moving on. The Lord's Prayer test. It was believed that a witch could not possibly get through a proper Lord's Prayer without stumbling words and forgetting parts. So they'd bring the witch to court and force them to word for word recite a prayer, and if they fucked it up, that's curtains for you. But this got very interesting when Minister George Burroughs was accused. He got up there and he did his little prayer right down to the T. The court hanged him anyway. I'm assuming after that they probably took that one away and went for a more foolproof method, like drowning people they didn't like. Next was searching for witch marks, and witch marks are basically just anything that they could come up with to say that you're a witch. Could be scars, moles, freckles. Look at my arm right now. I don't know if you can see, but I am literally covered. I would be fucked. We're literally fucked. What's that James Charles sound? Basically, if you had skin and I wanted to accuse you, I could probably come up with something to find to accuse you. Next is weighing against the Bible. They believed that witches' supernatural powers made them lighter than the Bible. So they'd literally weigh them against it. And if you were lighter than the Bible, you were hanged. And this would have been really bad for me because I am so skinny. I am so teensy-tiny that I would have been I'm not a witch, but I would have been lighter than Bible just because I am, and that just feels really unfair to the itty bitty skinny tiny snatched girls community, you know? I'm just so grateful. I'm really grateful for living in 2024. These so-called tests were basically public displays to confirm what they already decided. Once someone was accused, it was basically impossible to be proven innocent. We have the famous story of Giles Cory. Giles was like the ultimate Puritan, cool grandpa dude. He was 81 years old, and he was accused because he was wealthy, stubborn, and stood up for his wife, which, wow, what a crazy thing to do. When he was accused, he refused to plead guilty or innocent. Basically, they put a board on his body and then they gradually started stacking stones on him. And they figured eventually he would confess so that he could get out of this predicament. But he kept going, and his famous words were, "More weight."
More weight.
They would come to ask for a confession and he would just look at them and he'd be like, "More weight, bruh, keep it going." This went on for 2 days until he finally lost his breath. And I think a lot of us learn about this one in school, but what I didn't know is that the reason he did this is because if he went to court and lost, his land would be taken away, and he had kids and a wife that he wanted to be able to preserve that land for. So it's just absolutely so tragic that he had to literally pay that price for his family to have a future. With such a respected figure in the community opposing the witch trials to the very last breath, it started to make people suspicious. Rebecca Nurse, the town's beloved grandma, midwife, and like publicly known chiller, was also accused. But the plot gets thicker because not only was the Nurse family in land disputes with the Putnams, she was actually a midwife to Ann Putnam Sr., who had lost like tons of kids. You can see how it's like, obviously she ate my babies because she's an evil witch. In colonial times, midwives were often accused of witchcraft because they were doing things like performing abortions, they were working outside the home, so people were like, "Oh, you went into that lady's house and there's no baby, obviously you ate it." And you gotta keep in mind, like colonial times, the birth survival rate was probably not very high, so they had a lot of dead babies on their hand. And if you have no form of science or education, maybe you do infer that they are in fact eating the babies. Maybe you do think that. If you think that now, you're stupid. If you're thinking that in the 1600s, you're stupid, but you don't have resources. But now it's starting to connect the dots. Like, holy shit, the Putnams were involved in a lot of the cards here. Holy shit, they really took advantage of this. The Rebecca Nurse trial was a hot mess. First, they found her not guilty, but then the girls had another fit. So then the court was like, "Oh, I guess obviously we misjudged and you are in fact a witch, and good night, you're done." Checking out the Rebecca Nurse homestead was so sick because it was a beautiful piece of land. Oh my gosh, I loved it. It was like so like fall vibes. They even remodeled a little piece of it to be for a Hocus Pocus 2 launch party, which is a little stupid but kind of cool.
They did say that Hocus Pocus did some sort of premiere party here.
The Salem Witch Trials came to an end after a year of outright hysteria in 1693. 19 people were hanged, Giles Cory was pressed to death, and 5 people died due to the harsh conditions of prison. The town of Salem saw over 200 people accused of witchcraft, most of which had no substantial evidence. They even did this thing called like spectral evidence, where if you have a nightmare of somebody, that counts. So people were literally making shit up with no verification, not even a witness. Among those accused was none other than the mayor's wife. And obviously, this marked a major turning point in public perception. Alarmed by the accusation of his wife, the mayor starts taking action on this. At this point, even religious leaders were starting to be like, okay, this is getting a little weird. Famously, Increase Mather said, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than 1 innocent person should be condemned." Yeah, especially if that innocent person is a 4-year-old. As public skepticism started to grow because they were doing literally the most ridiculous things, the mayor started to feel the heat. So on October 29th, 1692, Governor Phipps dissolved the special court that was in charge of witch trials. Then he stopped allowing spectral evidence in court, and by May of 1693, he pardoned all those in prison, which put the witch trials to a definitive end. Although Governor Phipps finally decided to do what was right, the consequences of the trial would linger around Salem for years. In 1697, the Massachusetts its general court, decided to hold a day of fasting and soul searching for the victims of the Salem Witch Trials. And in 1711, the state reversed the convictions of those accused. Around the same time, they also released financial restitution to the families affected. It would be so cool to talk to somebody who is a direct descendant of one of these colonists. Like, that would be crazy. If you know someone or are someone, definitely share your story in the comments. I would love to know all about this. So the Salem Witch Trials to this day remains one of the most infamous moments in American history. But one question has remained after all of these years. Like, why did the girls start throwing things and contorting around in the first place? Was it witchcraft? Were they actually possessed? Were they sick? Were they mentally ill? Were they bored? What was it? So with the help of a few of my friends I made in Salem, let's explore some theories. The first is ergot poisoning. One theory suggests that ergot, which is a fungus that grows on rye, could have been the culprit. This is basically like moldy bread. Ergot can cause hallucinations similar to LSD, leading some experts to believe that people in Salem might have been tripping balls on bad bread. A 1976 study by Linda Caparel found that ergot thrives in damp conditions, which aligns with Salem's climate at the time.
I hear it.
My name's Jackie.
What do you think your favorite theory is?
Mine is the ergot theory, which is the wheat that was causing the girls to have hallucinations. From my understanding of it was Tituba, who was an indentured servant, was actually doing forms of witchcraft. And I think that the ergot caused them to fall under a spell of sorts.
So who am I here with?
Dave Neville, a precinct specialist here at the Peabody Essex Museum. Certainly the hysteria, which began with a couple of girls, and I believe that they might have been under the influence of Tituba and probably involved in voodoo, and then it spread.
However, I've seen other people refute this by saying the physical conditions that were noted by doctors just did not seem consistent with ergot. Also, they had like a really nutrient-dense diet, which can help offset ergot. I mean, they were like a port, so they had fish. They were agricultural, so they had that. So it's been refuted. The next theory is that this was all orchestrated from the very beginning. I mean, Salem was a small new town filled with property disputes, rivalries, and religious tension. Some historians like Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissenbaum argue that the witch trials were a convenient way to settle old scores, using the witch label to take down enemies. Ann Putnam Sr. seems like the messiest bitch on the street, and she was the one that was out there rattling off convictions to everyone, and conveniently, her daughter was one of the first ones. Betty Paris, one of the first ones to act afflicted, who other than Tituba, her house servant, was the one to do the first confession. Seems like it was kind of all orchestrated by Betty Paris's dad, right? And then other people in the community started hopping onto this new trend to get rid of people you don't like.
You mentioned it before. There were land grabs going on. There was a lot of jealousy, a lot of infighting about who owed who what. And I think that turned some people against certain individuals.
I'm exploring the cause about the witch trials. You know,
propaganda, property, you know what I mean? That one would get jealous of the other one and they would just make up rumors. And then it became like, it went everywhere because everyone started saying devil worshippers, all of the above. And these victims, like Bridget Bishop, she was just a proud woman that was independent. Many marriages, and she owned a bar. And so because of that, they killed her. And people don't realize that in 1692 that they killed animals too. And that's why I opened up Salem Saves Animals. In honor of all the animals that have passed on, I opened it up. And I intend on getting more information about the animals. I know about a dog, a horse, but I want to get even more information about that included on the tour, because our witch walk tour, because it's important to know these things so we don't ever repeat history.
there was a theory that it was from the rye being processed incorrectly, gave the girls like LSD-like symptoms.
Without a doubt, they had different situations for each one. But remember, they all got the property after that person was convicted. and hung.
In my opinion, this is probably the most realistic one because it just lines up like that. It really does. This next theory is one that I learned from volunteers at the Rebecca Nurse House and I had never even heard of before. Some people believe that it is due to PTSD. Many of the afflicted girls, such as Abigail Williams and Betty Paris, lived in communities on the frontier where they were exposed to violent Native American raids. And like, guys, I feel like it goes without saying, but I do want to note, like, obviously the Native Americans like were there first and the colonists were probably so shitty to them first, so like boo-hoo, you know. These attacks were a constant threat in colonial Massachusetts, could have left lasting emotional scars. Mary Beth Norton, in her book In the Devil's Snare, explores the link, noting that some of the afflicted girls had lost family members or witnessed violent deaths during these raids. Such trauma is consistent with the development of PTSD, which can manifest in hypervigilance, nightmares, and disassociation, all symptoms displayed by the afflicted girls. My girl at the Rebecca Nurse House was also telling me that she thinks Ann Putnam Sr. had PTSD from losing all those kids, and that's why she was accusing. But I'm kind of like, she's blaming her midwife, she's blaming people she has beef with, she's blaming people with shiny things. Girl, I don't think so. During my time investigating this in Salem, I learned so much. And I hadn't even planned on this being in the video, but it seems so important to talk about Salem today. Today, the legacy of the witch trials is still like a core part of what Salem is. Every October, over 500,000 people descend into Salem for the town's haunted happenings. Tourism, shopping, events, all related to the Salem Witch Trials. And this brings in over $100 million each year. And honestly, this year, it had to have been way more than that because it was so unbelievably crowded, worse than Disneyland on its worst day, I swear to you. Shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder. I made a TikTok about this and people basically just called me stupid, so I don't want to get too much into this, but oh my god. I expected like Disneyland level of crowds that people complain about. It was far beyond that. But more importantly, how do the locals feel about it? Is it empowering to keep the memory of this event alive, or has it turned the town into a novelty spectacle for tourists?
And how do you feel about the effect of the witch trials on Salem tourism?
I think that a lot of cities that have like a troubled past tend to go really far in the other direction. Like Berlin, for example, is a very progressive city based on they obviously have a troubled past. So I think that there's not much we can do about that. Personally, I don't mind the amount of tourism we get from it.
After spending time in Salem, I thought everybody there was like amazing. People were like so nice to begin our interviews. They were so cool to hang out with us and we had a great time. But I can't imagine living there. Like it was so over the top. People were literally like walking around smashed out of their mind, open carrying down these residential areas.
And there's pedophiles like Cardinal Law, who was a pedophile in this Boston area. He was a and they shipped him over to Rome and let him retire in the Vatican.
People were trashing the place, being so messy. People were literally going up to these houses because they are like beautiful and historic looking, but they were full on looking inside people's houses, like hands up on the window like this. I can see how if you live there, you're probably so over it. But I do want to say it's kind of interesting that the city of Salem for decades said, oh yeah, just ignore us when you think about that part of history. Let's not go there. I kind of thought the vibe would be more like history and a little bit of like a solemn tone, but it really felt like a drunk Instagram party fest, which is totally fine, but don't go expecting like an interesting life-changing experience. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials serve as a cautionary tale of what can happen when you let religion, power, and fear-mongering get in the way. The Salem Witch Trials are not only a story of tragedy and hysteria, but I think it's also an important message about what happens when women are silenced and how easily and fast that can happen. A lot of the women who were accused were women who didn't fit in, who were poor or outspoken or independent, but then it slowly worked its way up to be women who were not so easy targets, like wealthy women, women with assets, women with husbands, women in better positions. So I just think it's kind of relevant today that if we don't support the women who are maybe in less fortunate cases, eventually it will be us. By branding these women as witches, it was such an easy way to take control of them. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a great story of what can happen when fear and power come together to oppress people who are out on the margins. Although we've come a long way, I still think it's relevant to ask how women today are judged and isolated for being on the outskirts of what society deems as normal. This is a lesson to question authority, to defend justice, and to recognize the strength in a voice that refuses to be silenced. And also one that stands up for other people, because I bet if that damn mayor's wife would have said something in 1692, there could have been dozens of lives saved. While this story is very mysterious and interesting, I think it's also very topical and very relevant, and a great reminder that we as women need to stand up for one another, even when it's scary, even when it feels like not relevant, like, oh, that's like some random lady in Alabama. I don't care. My rights are fine in my state. There's so many topical relevant instances where it's important to use your position and your privilege to help people who are maybe less advantaged. That got really serious at the end, but it's that time of the year, baby. Thank you so much for watching, and I would love if you could consider subscribing, because this video, I always do this. I sound like a pygmy. Please subscribe, go check out my merch, and go join my members only for priority reply to comments and fun bonus content like live streams and whatnot. Catch you in the next one. Bye.